Timothy Burns, Tim to his friends, looked at his cell phone after leaving a message from Candace, or Candy, as she liked to be called, his wife of 5 years. He had just signed a service contract with a large California company that had offices throughout the country. He knew his boss, Jake Hudson, would be extremely pleased as the new contract meant a significant expansion of his IT firm. The new contract also meant a significant increase in his salary. Maybe now, he thought, he and Candy will finally be able to start their own family, as they had planned. But he had concerns that had begun to creep into his mind after his camping trip with Jake a little over a week ago. There was something a little different about her when they returned from their trip. It seemed like her mind was on something else most of the time, and she was starting to get a little snappy with him. But that was not all. He noticed something else when they got home and threw their clothes into the laundry basket. A pair of her panties had something in the gusset. He picked them up and noticed that whatever it was already hardened and had a very distinctive smell. Then it dawned on him, and he felt as if his whole world had collapsed. He vowed to find out the truth. He knew he would be heading to the West Coast, so he visited an attorney to see what his options were. If Candy cheated, he thought, it would be the end of their marriage. "Are you sure that your wife is cheating on you?" asked Ruby Hawkins. Ruby was a lawyer who specialized in family law and divorce and was recommended to him by a friend who had just divorced his wife for cheating. "Not 100%, he said, "but I need to know, and if that's the case, I want a divorce." "Well then," said Ruby, "most divorces in this state occur without anyone's fault. You can file on the grounds of adultery, but you will need compelling evidence." "Do you mean, for example, photographs or videos?" Tim asked. "Yes," said Ruby. "If you want, I can instruct an investigator to follow her and find out for sure." "Yes, please," Tim said. "What can I expect during a divorce?" "Well, since she makes about the same amount as you do from your teaching job, there's a chance that we can save you from having to pay her any child support," Ruby said. "You don't own any real estate and you don't have any children, so essentially it's going to be split 50-50. You keep your pension and she keeps hers. Essentially, this is an even distribution of assets. If she cheats on you, we will use that as a basis and use whatever evidence we have to ensure a good outcome. I'll start the paperwork and we'll send it when we have the evidence." "Okay," Tim said. "Let's do that. I'll be out of town for about 3 days, so I think that's when she'll probably do it." She called her investigator, Marvin Johnson, and he suggested Tim install a tracking app on her phone. He also gave Tim a device to record phone calls on his landline and an audio recorder, which he hid in her purse. Tim hated doing this, but he had to know the truth. There were other clues as well. Ever since they'd gone camping, Jakey had seemed even more arrogant and condescending than before. It was almost as if he knew something that Tim didn't. He managed to hold out for a week, and Candy drove him to the airport, kissing him goodbye. "I'll call you this evening after dinner," he said. "Okay, honey," she told him. "Have a good flight." The first night he was away, he called Candy as promised, and was a little shocked when she told him that she would be working as a waitress at the party Jake was throwing at his house that evening. According to Candy, one of the waitresses was sick, and Jake asked if she would be willing to fill in for her. He didn't know that Jake had any plans because he didn't mention anything. "He promised to pay me $150 for the evening," Candy said. "I could use some extra money, since I won't be back to work until a couple of weeks later." He knew classes would resume soon and she could really use some extra money, but something wasn't right about it. "Really?" Tim asked. "Okay, go ahead, but be careful and tell me about it tomorrow, okay?" "Okay," she said. "You know that I love you, right?" "Yes," he said. "And I love you too. Good night." He finished the conversation, but a knot began to twist in his stomach. He called the investigator. "I just wanted to let you know that Candy was asked to waitress at a party at Jake Hudson's house," Tim said. "Okay," said Marvin. "We succeeded. I'll forward you everything we find out." "Thank you," Tim said, ending the conversation. The next day, he called Candy on her cell phone, but received no answer. He also called his home phone, but only got an answering machine. Of course, she didn't spend the night with Jake, he thought to himself. However, his hopes were dashed when he received an email from Marvin that same day. Candy spent the night at Hudson's house, and she is still there, the email said, and she was very busy the night before. I've attached a couple of photos, but I want to warn you that they are quite graphic. I will give you my full report when you return. Tim opened the attachments, and his heart sank. His beloved wife was there with whom he lived for 5 years. She had sex. With 3, damn it, 3 men. Men he had once considered friends. His hands began to shake and tears began to flow from his eyes. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He tried calling her again, but it went straight to voicemail. He also tried to call his home phone, but only got an answering machine. He didn't leave any message and went to the hotel bar to drown his sorrows. The next morning, he checked the tracker and found that Candy's phone was still at Jake's house, which meant she was probably still there. Marvin confirmed this assumption with an email that contained 2 more photographs of his wife. The nature of the photographs was the same as the previous ones, but with 10 men, including Jake, his son Mike, and 5 more employees of Jake's IT company. He had once considered all these people to be reliable colleagues, but that was no longer the case. He didn't recognize the other 3 and assumed they were Mike's friends. He completed his business with the California client and, contract in hand, checked out of the hotel and caught an early flight home. He caught a taxi at the airport and noticed that Candy's car was missing when he arrived home. Checking the tracker, he saw that her phone was still in Jake's house. He went inside, changed his clothes, and called Ruby's office. He was surprised when her receptionist said that she was free and could see him in the afternoon. He called Candy on her cell phone and was surprised when she answered. She seemed out of breath when she answered. "Hello?" she asked. "Hi, it's me, Tim," he said. "Where are you?" "I'm home. Just finishing up a few things before class starts," she said. He was shocked that she had lied to him so blatantly. "I see," he said. "Well, I'm done here in California and I'm heading home." "Oh, okay," she said. "I missed you so much. Call me when you land and I'll pick you up at the airport." "No, don't worry," he said. "I'll take a taxi. Bye." He ended the conversation and wondered if she noticed that he didn't tell her that he loved her, or that they would see each other later. Shaking his head, he left the house and went to visit Ruby. Candy looked at the phone after Tim ended the call. He always ended his calls by saying he loved her, but this time he didn't. In fact, she noticed that his voice didn't sound friendly at all. She fully intended to return home after that first night, but lying naked between Jake and his son felt so good that she just couldn't leave. After all, she owed it to herself, she thought. This will all end when classes start again, she thought. And Tim would never know. So she spent the next day and the next night with Jake and his son Mike. That second day, Jake went to work for a couple of hours, but Mike kept her busy and even made arrangements with several of his friends. When Jake returned home, she was having sex with Mike on Jake's bed. When they finished, Jake sat up and looked at her. "So maybe I should send your husband somewhere more often," he said with a sly smile. "You know that my classes are resuming soon?" she said. "So I won't be available for a week. I wouldn't dare do anything like that while he's still at home." "Why not?" Jake asked. "Maybe for a change he would enjoy seeing how real men treat you." Jake and Mike both laughed at this. "Well, I have to admit I had a great time," she said. "But I still love Tim, and I don't want to hurt him." "Well, maybe I can see to it that he gets sent away for the weekend," Jake said. "That way you can come and play with us in the house." "Sounds funny," she said. "But at some point he will find out anyway. Tim is not a fool, you know." "Don't worry," Jake said, picking up his video camera. "I'll take care of Timmy boy. There is only one thing." "What is this?" she asked. "I don't want you to have sex with him anymore," Jake said. "Now you belong to us. Understood?" "But how will I do this?" she asked. "You'll think of something," Jake said. "Come up with some excuse. You know, like, I have a headache, or something like that. Okay, I'll try, she said. Later that day, several of Mike's friends came over and had the opportunity to try Candy's products. Jake invited a few single guys from the group. She was now officially a party slut and enjoying it. Tim was simply shocked when he saw all the evidence Marvin had collected. In addition to the photographs, he had 2 DVDs of videos of his wife performing a variety of roles with several men, things she would never do for him. His love for her faded after he witnessed her debauchery. Ruby consoled him as best she could, but it was a lost cause. How could she just like that 5 years later turn into such a traitor, he wondered. And what did I do to deserve this? What about Jake? He considered this man somewhat older than himself a friend. Now he knew better. I'll go ahead and file for divorce, citing adultery, Ruby said. If you want, I can also file a lawsuit for alienation of affection against Jake and the men you work with. These types of lawsuits don't usually go very far, but I think we can get a good settlement. Do what you have to do, Tim said. Just don't do anything stupid, Ruby said. I don't want to post bail for you from jail. Tim shook his head. Don't worry, he said. I won't. When can you prepare the documents? I can have everything ready to ship in just a couple of days, she said. In the meantime, try to behave normally around your wife. I'm not that good an actor, Tim told her, and I will never touch her again. God only knows what she got from all these men. Tell her you're not feeling well, Ruby suggested. This should buy you some time. Tim nodded his head. Yes, okay, he said, before leaving. As he sat in his car, he suddenly realized something else. There was no way he could work for Jake again, and he would never be able to bear the presence of men nearby who would cuckold him. He took out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he wanted. He dialed the number and hoped for the best. Carlson, said the man on the other end of the line when he answered. John, this is Tim Burns, Tim said. Tim, how are you, old friend? Asked John. It could have been better, Tim said. Listen, is this vacancy at Empire still open? John Carlson, CEO of Empire, had been trying to get Tim on board for some time, but Tim felt he needed to stay with Jake out of loyalty. However, now there is no trace of this devotion left. Of course it is, said John. Have you finally decided to join a reputable company? Yeah, something like that, Tim said. Some things caught my attention and I found that I could no longer work there. I'm sorry to hear that, John said. Is there anything I can do? Just give me a job, Tim said. I promise I will work just as hard for you as I do for Jake. Of course, said John. Can you start on Monday? Absolutely true, Tim said. Okay, John said. Look, why don't you and your pretty wife come over tonight and try Rose's famous lasagna? We can catch up and I can discuss the compensation package with you. I would love to, but unfortunately, I can't come with my wife, said Tim. About? Asked John. What's happened? I really don't want to go into detail over the phone, Tim said. I can go a little deeper into this tonight if you want. Of course, Tim, John said in a worried tone. You know, Rose is a licensed counselor. Maybe she can help you if you want. That actually sounds good, John. I appreciate it, Tim said. Okay, John said. I'll call Rose and let her know. Do you think you can come in at, say, 6:30 p.m.? Of course, said Tim. Today at 6:30. Thanks again, buddy. With pleasure, said John. They ended the conversation and Tim felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off his back. He started the car and headed home. When he got there, he noticed that Candy still hadn't returned from Jake's house. He grabbed his briefcase and went inside. He took a shower, changed clothes, and sat down at the computer, where he wrote a letter of resignation. Candy finally arrived around 5 p.m. and noticed her husband sitting at the computer. She went to kiss him, but he turned away, and she ended up kissing him on the cheek. Surprised, she looked at him before speaking. Everything is fine? She asked. Not really, he said. I do not feel well. Maybe it's jet lag or something, I don't know. I'll sleep on the futon when I get back tonight. Will you come back? She asked. Where are you going? I'm meeting someone for dinner, he said. Are you dating a woman? She asked with concern in her voice. You mean, am I cheating on you? He asked her. No, I never cheated on you in all the time we were together, and I have no intention of doing it now. Can you say the same? She recoiled in horror. Does he know? She asked herself. No, he would never have been able to find out. Of course I can, she said. Tim wasn't convinced. So, how was your trip to California? She asked, trying to change the subject. Successful, he said. How was your little job at Jake's house? Everything went well, she said. Even when it was hard, it was still fun. I bet, he said without any emotion in his voice. He looked at his watch before speaking again. I guess I'll go, he told her before saving his work and turning off the computer. He stood up, walked past her without saying a word, and headed to the master bedroom, where he changed into something less casual. When he came out, Candy was sitting on the sofa. How long will you be gone? She asked. I don't know, he said. Do not wait for me. Bye. He grabbed his keys and headed to the door. She couldn't help but notice that he didn't kiss her or tell her he loved her. He always did this when he left the house. Seeing his car drive away, she picked up her home phone and called Jake, unaware that her conversation was being recorded. Jake, I think he knows something, she said. What makes you think that? Jake asked. He didn't touch me at all, she said. Usually he always kisses me and says he loves me, but he didn't. He seemed so cold, and he just left, saying he had an appointment for dinner. About? Jake asked. He didn't say with whom? No, he didn't do it, she said. JK, what if he knows? What if he plans to leave me? So, what if he does? Jake grinned. You can always come and stay with us, and don't worry about Timmy boy. I will make him run so much that he will hardly ever be home. But I don't want to lose him, Candy exclaimed. I love him, Jake laughed out loud. Yes, you've shown us all how much you love him over the past 2 days, haven't you? Jake asked. It's not funny, Jake, she said. I know what I did to you guys, and yes, I liked it, but I still love him. I don't want to lose him. Yes, exactly, said Jake. Look, let him get this out of his head. After a while, he will come on board, and if he doesn't, well, we can do something about it too. You're not going to hurt him, are you? She asked. Not many words, Jake said. We just have to show him how things will be from now on, and you will help this happen. What? Candy asked in shock. When the time comes, you will help us explain everything to him. Remember who you belong to now. I'm sure you wouldn't want the school board to see the video footage we have of you. You wouldn't dare, Candy said. Oh yeah, but I'd love to, Jake said. I have a video of you on a hike, and a lot of videos of you in very compromising positions. Your ass literally belongs to me, so you need to keep little Timmy in line. Feeling trapped, Candy gave up. Okay, Jake, she said. But don't hurt him, Jake chuckled over the phone. Yes, as you say, he said, ending the conversation. Tim drove up to the large 2-story house where John and Rose Carlson lived. He got out of the car, grabbing a bottle of wine that he had picked up on the way. John opened the door as he rang the bell and graciously accepted the wine. Come in, Tim, he said with a smile. And thanks. This will be put to good use tonight. John led Tim to the dining room where Rose was waiting for him with her lasagna. Tim, please meet my wife Rose, John said. Rose, this is Tim Burns, our new customer service representative. Tim shook Rose's hand while John opened a bottle of wine. Nice to meet you, Tim, Rose said with a smile. I'm glad to meet you too, Mrs. Carlson, Tim said. Please call me Rose, she said. Mrs. Carlson sounds so official. They took their places at the table, and Rose served lasagna on plates while John poured the wine. Tim had never tasted such delicious lasagna and expressed his gratitude. This is the best lasagna I've ever eaten, he said. I'm glad you like it, Rose said. This is one of my signature dishes. So, Tim, I don't want to pry into someone else's business, but I'm curious as to why you decided to break up with Jake so quickly, John said. Something happened? Tim nodded his head before starting. Yeah, something happened, Tim said. Please, Tim, tell us about this, Rose asked. Tim took a moment to collect his thoughts before telling them the story. Damn, John said. It's chilling. I sympathize with you, I really do. Something similar happened to me, but the circumstances were completely different. So what are you going to do now other than change jobs? I've met with a lawyer, and I'm filing for divorce, Tim said. My lawyer says it will be a pretty much even split. What about a consultation? Asked Rose. Did you think about that? This has gone too far, Tim said. I don't know what hit Candy. It's like she just flipped a switch and suddenly became a slut. I never thought she would have the strength to do this. How do you cope with all this? Asked Rose. Not too good, Tim said. My lawyer says that I should try to behave normally around Candy, but it is very difficult for me to do this. Right now, I can't even look at her. Maybe you should see a psychologist, she said. I can do it, Tim said. Trust me, Rose is the best in the business, John said. I think she can help you get through this if you want. In addition, this is included in your social package. That's definitely a plus, Tim said, laughing. I'm serious, John said. Rose was a godsend when I needed her. I know she can help you too. He turned to Rose. What do you think? Can you fit it into your schedule? Of course, she said. I think an hour a week should do the trick. What do you say about this, Tim? Tim thought about this proposal before answering. Okay, I'll do it, he said. John smiled and patted Tim on the shoulder. A good man, he said. I will make sure that you have the time necessary for consultation. Deal with Rose and let me know what you come up with. I'll do that, thanks, Tim said. Now, if you don't mind, honey, Tim and I will retire to my office to discuss his new job, John said. I don't mind at all, she said with a smile. And I'm looking forward to working with you too, Tim. Thank you, Tim said, standing next to John. They retired to John's home office, where he poured them each a glass of brandy. They spent the next 2 hours discussing his new job. By the time they finished, Tim felt like he was taking control of his life again. Tim shook John's hand and headed back home. It was around 10 p.m. when Tim arrived at his house. He looked around and saw that the lights were still on in his house. He hoped Candy was there alone. He got out of the car, walked into his house, and saw Candy sitting on the sofa. So, how did your little meeting go? She asked. Very good, thank you, he said. Now, if you don't mind, I'll go to bed. Good night. He went into the second bedroom, where his computer was, and began to undress. Are you sleeping here now? Candy asked from the door. Yes, said Tim. I'm still not feeling well, so I'll sleep on the futon. This is problem? No. I think not, she said. It's just that you've been gone for 3 days, and I was hoping that we could, play a little. I'm not in the mood today, Tim said. In fact, the thought of touching her right now made him disgusted. Okay, she said quietly. Maybe tomorrow? I don't know, he said. Let's see. She nodded her head and turned away. She couldn't help but wonder if he even knew anything about her actions lately. The next day, he got up before Candy, grabbed his resignation letter, and poured himself a cup of coffee. He saw Candy's purse on the kitchen table and grabbed the audio recorder, then downloaded the audio recording of yesterday's phone call. He left the apartment without saying goodbye or telling Candy that he loved her. She heard the door close as he left and went to bed. Tears rolled down her cheeks. When he got to the office, he barely spoke to anyone. He greeted his secretary, then walked into his office and closed the door. He was gathering his things when Jake walked into his office. What is this? Jake asked. Tim reached into his briefcase and pulled out 2 envelopes. One of them is a signed contract from California, he said. And the second is my resignation, effective immediately. I believe you owe me a bonus for getting the California bill, and you owe me my final salary along with the rest of my vacation. Resignation? Jake asked in shock. What the hell? Why are you leaving? I need you. Seriously? Tim asked. You really don't know why? Do you think I'm stupid or something? You know that's not true. To be honest, some things caught my attention, and I decided I couldn't work here anymore. So I got a job at another company. I'll be leaving you in just a few minutes. Then I went to the HR department. Wait, Tim, can't we talk about this? Jake asked. Tim shook his head. There's nothing to talk about, Jake, Tim said. I'm over it. Finished. I considered you my friend, but you stabbed me in the back and ruined my marriage. You can find someone else to cuckold. So that's what it's all about, Jake said. Well, just so you know, your wife was more than willing to have sex with me. We shouldn't let something like this ruin your career. Just go with the flow for a while. Let Candy sow some wild oats for a while. When she's done, she'll be all yours again. Do you really think I would agree to something like that? By the way, how long have you been having fun with her? Well, the first time was at the campsite, Jake said. On the second day, when you and the others were skiing. And you should know that she pestered me that day. She even told me that I'm bigger than you. She begged me to have sex right there. Tim never turned down Candy. He tried several times, but he just couldn't do it. He couldn't explain why, and Candy never said anything about it. And this was around the time you suddenly forced me to leave to take care of some things at the office, wasn't it? Tim asked. You wanted to get me out of the way so you could have sex with my wife. Jake grinned and nodded his head. Yes, so what? He asked. Tim isn't done yet. And this whole thing about hiring her as a waitress at your party was just another excuse to get her into bed, wasn't it? Tim asked. Yes, it was so. So what? Jake asked. Tim took out his phone and stopped the audio recording he had started when Jake entered the office. Thank you for your recognition, Tim said. Now, if you don't mind, I'm done packing. I'll go to the HR department and won't bother you. Wait, Jake said. You can't use this recording. We'll see, Tim said. I'm leaving here. Goodbye, Jake. You'll rot in hell, okay? You forgot something, Jake said, picking up the photo of Candy that Tim kept on his desk. I haven't forgotten, Tim said. I do not want it. You and your son want this traitor so badly that you can take her for yourself. I'm done with her, and with you. Goodbye. With these words, he left the office. Jake looked at Tim as he walked away, wondering what the hell just happened. How did Tim find out what he and his son did to Candy? He asked himself. What do you mean, he resigned? Candy asked when Jakey called. He just handed me the signed contract and resignation letter and left, Jake said. He knows. Candy. I don't know how he knows, but he knows. What did you say to him? She asked. The truth, said Jake. I told him about how it was for the first time, on the hike. You're an idiot, she exclaimed. Well, he asked, and I told him, Jake said. He also left a photograph of you, which he kept on his desk. He said he didn't need it. Amazing, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. So what should we do now? She asked. It's not my problem, Jake said. He's your husband. You can handle this. Unless, of course, you want me to step up and make him see the error of his ways. No, she said. You've done enough, thank you. Stay away from this. I'll deal. As you say, he said. With these words, he hung up. Candy looked at her phone with tears streaming down her face. She didn't want a divorce, but she knew Tim wouldn't tolerate her cheating. She decided that she would do everything in her power to keep him. She sat on the sofa, holding her head in her hands, and sobbed over what she had done. A few minutes later, Tim pulled into the driveway. He saw Candy's car and looked around to see if Jake's car was anywhere nearby. Without noticing this, he grabbed his box and briefcase and went inside. He saw Candy on the couch and, without saying anything, went into his office. He closed and locked the door, then checked for voice recordings. He found the recording and listened to the conversation between Candy and Jake. He forwarded it to his lawyer and then quickly called her. Hi, Tim, she said. I just received your last email. Now I am preparing your documents. Okay, Tim said. When can they be submitted? If you want, I can pull some strings and my bailiff will deliver them later this afternoon, she said. Will this suit you? So it will be, thank you, he said. After hanging up, he walked over to his gun safe, opened it, and pulled out his old .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol. He had no plans to use it, but he didn't want any problems with Jake or Candy. He walked into the kitchen, put his briefcase on the table, and looked at Candy. "We need to talk," he said, placing the gun on the table so that he could quickly reach it if necessary. "Is this really necessary?" she asked, pointing to the gun. "I hope not," he said. "I just want to make sure in case your lover decides to break in here." "My lover?" she asked. "Don't play coy," he said. "I'm not in the mood for your games. Now sit down. We need to discuss something." She sat down scared, not knowing what her husband was going to do. "First things first," Tim said. "Later today, someone will come by and give you the papers." Candy recoiled in shock. "Divorce?" she asked. "Why?" "I don't want a divorce. I love you." "Bullshit," Tim said. "I know everything about you, Jake, his son, and everyone else. You've been having fun with the last few days. So, I filed for divorce on charges of adultery." "Adultery?" she asked. "You don't have any evidence of this," Tim smiled, taking out an envelope. He posted several time-stamped photos, all of which clearly showed her having sex with multiple men, including Jake. "I also have video and audio," Tim said. "Would you like to watch?" She shook her head, realizing that it was a hopeless matter. "Okay," he said. "Considering the circumstances, I was more than fair. No support. You get half of what's in the bank, and we each get to keep our pension. You can take all your things. I've already paid and canceled your credit card. I have a cashier's check for your half of what's left. There is also a restraining order that says you must stay at least 150 meters away from me, my place of residence and my place of work. So from now until you are served with the documents, you have time to pack out your trash." "Are you kicking me out?" she asked, and tears flowed down her cheeks. "That's pretty much it," he said. "But what if I decide to contest the divorce?" she asked. Tim laughed. "I don't think that would be very wise," he said. "What do you think the school board would say if some of these photos and videos just happened to appear? Do you think the parents of your students would want someone like you to teach their children? I know not." "You won't dare!" she exclaimed. "Do you want to take this chance?" Tim asked. Candy looked down for a moment before shaking her head. "No," she said. "Me not. I'll need this job." "That's right. That's how it will be," Tim said. "There are a couple more things you should know." "What?" she asked dejectedly. "You will be required to hand over your rings and give up my last name," he said. "Oh my God, you've become a heartless bastard, haven't you?" she asked, taking off her rings. "Yes." "Well, you gave me a good reason," Tim said. "I just want to know one thing. What's happened? What made you turn from a loving, faithful wife into a walking garbage dump?" She lowered her eyes before speaking. "It happened on the second day of the hike," she said. "You were on the boat, and I was in the tent. Jake walked by and saw me. I had already undressed and was lying there, trying to rest, when Jake walked by and entered the tent. At first he seemed embarrassed to see me so naked. We started talking and then he pulled his pants down and that was the end of it." "So some asshole takes off his pants and you immediately jump on him?" said Tim. "And that's all it took for you to become a traitor?" "How many times did you have sex with him on that trip?" "Twice," she said. "The first time was when you were jet skiing, and the second time was when Jake sent you back to the office." Tim shook his head and pointed at the photographs. "I see that none of your lovers used any protection," he said. "Weren't you worried about getting pregnant or getting something from one of them?" "I'm still taking the pills," she said. "That doesn't mean you can't get pregnant," Tim said. "And you can still get sick. Is this what you planned?" "Oh God, no," she said. Tim shook his head. "You know, during the entire time that we were together, I was often pestered by women who, compared to you, look like goddesses," he said. "I refused them all. Do you know why? Because I thought I had a loving and faithful wife at home, and I would never do anything to hurt her. But you didn't even think about what you were doing. You didn't care how I felt. I hope it was all worth it for you. Now pack up your junk. I expect you to leave when you are served with the documents." "Tim, please," she began. "Can't we turn to some psychologist? Please, I'll never do this again, I promise. Can't you forgive me this time?" "I will never forgive you for what you did," Tim said, and his expression was harsher than she had ever seen before. "Never. Maybe if you slipped just once, were raped, drugged, or something like that, I might not pay attention to it. But that did not happen. From the moment Jakey pulled his pants down, you were his willing toy, and I will never be able to forgive this level of betrayal." "But don't you love me enough to get through this?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I can't stand the sight of you right now," he said. "The sooner you disappear from my life, the better. Now go and start getting ready. Everything you leave behind will either be burned, thrown away, or donated to Goodwill." Sobbing, she got up and went to the master bedroom to pack her things. Tim watched as Candy pulled out one full garbage bag after another. She stopped and looked at him. "Can you at least help me carry this to the car?" she asked. "No," said Tim. "It's your trash. You deal with it. And remember, everything you leave behind will either be burned or thrown away. This includes photographs and your wedding dress." "Would you burn my wedding dress?" she asked. "My parents paid thousands for this dress." "Well, then you better take it if you don't want it to burn," Tim said. Sobbing, she carried the bag to her car and returned for another. "Damn it," Tim asked himself. "How much junk does she have?" A couple of hours later, she sat down on a bale, exhausted. "I can't fit anything else in the car," she said. "Can I come back later for the rest? Please." "No," said Tim. "You will not be allowed closer than 150 meters to this place. Ask your parents if they can come pick them up if you want. I will refrain from throwing anything away for a few days." "Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it," she said. "Oh my God, I was just wondering, what am I going to tell my parents?" "Try telling the truth for a change," Tim said. "Tell them you cheated on me with my boss and others, and I'll throw you out." "Seriously?" she asked. "They will disown me if I do this. It's not my problem," Tim said. "But I guarantee you it will be much worse if you try to make me out to be the bad guy or make it look like one. You know how your parents feel about lying." Around this time, there was a knock on the door. "I think this is for you," Tim said. Candy walked slowly to the door and opened it to reveal the deputy sheriff. "Candace Burns?" he asked. She nodded her head. "It's me," she said. "Do you have any identification?" he asked. She took out her driver's license and showed it to him. After examining them, he returned them to her and then handed them the envelope. "You've been served, ma'am," he said. "There is also an injunction that requires you to vacate the premises immediately. You can sign the divorce papers now if you want." She nodded her head and took out the divorce papers. After looking through them, she asked for a pen and signed the papers. "I'll give this back to the lawyer," he said. "You need to leave right now. If you try to return, you will be arrested and sent to prison. You understand?" "Yes," she said, and tears flowed down her cheeks. She looked back at Tim. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Yeah, me too," Tim said. "Bye." "Goodbye," she said quietly, leaving. The deputy looked at Tim and nodded his head before walking away. The next few days were hectic for Tim. Candy never tried to contact him, but Jake called his home phone twice and left threatening messages. "Damn it, Tim. I know you're there," he shouted. "If you don't drop this lawsuit, I'll come and kick your fucking ass." Tim smiled, copied the voicemail, and forwarded it to Ruby, who in turn notified the local sheriff's department. Candy's parents also called asking if they could come pick up some more of her things. "Yes, of course," said Tim. "Just make sure she's not with you. She has a restraining order placed on her." "Okay," said George, Candy's father, with a sigh. When she and Candy's mother, Bernice, arrived, They took what Candy had left behind and used the time to convince Tim to call off the divorce. "Tim, she made a mistake," Bernice said. "Of course, you can forget about what she did and take her back. She's crazy about you." "What did she tell you, Bernice?" Tim asked. "She said she had a fight with your boss," Bernice said. "And that's all?" Tim asked. "Well, yes," she said. "She didn't go into any detail, and we didn't insist on it." Tim grabbed an envelope with photographs and DVDs and showed it all to Bernice and George. They were shocked when they saw the photos. "I'm sorry she didn't tell you the whole truth," Tim said. "As you can see, everything turned out to be much worse than she expected." "Oh my God," Bernice said. "I had no idea it was so bad." "I'm so sorry, Tim," she said. "I don't blame you for what you did." George's face turned purple with rage. "I will have a long conversation with our stupid daughter," he said. "Have you done anything else with these photographs?" he asked. Tim shook his head. "Not yet, but I warned her not to resist the divorce," he said. They commiserate with him for a moment and then finish packing up the rest of her things. Half an hour later, they left the house, giving Tim a warm hug and wishing him all the best. Later that day, as Tim was sitting watching TV, there was another knock on the door. He looked through the peephole and saw Jake, Mike, and two of Tim's former work colleagues. He walked into his office, grabbed the gun from the gun case, and called 911. Holding the gun behind his back, he barely managed to open the door before they rushed inside. "We'll kick your fucking ass," Jake growled. Tim pulled out his gun and pointed it at Jake, forcing them to stop. "You're not really gonna shoot at us," Jake said. "You don't have the courage." "Do you really want to check this?" Tim asked. "Just so you know, I already called 911 and the police are on their way here right now. If you're here when they get here, you're going to jail for violating the restraining order." Jake, I think he's serious," said one of the other two men. Jake looked at him for a moment, then turned back to Tim. It was at that moment that they all heard a siren nearby and saw flashing red and blue lights. "Yes, Jake, I'm serious," Tim said. They turned to leave, but two very large uniformed police officers stood in the doorway. Tim lowered the gun. "Put the gun down, sir," one of the officers said. Tim obeyed, placing the gun on the kitchen table. "Sir, these people are violating the restraining order," Tim said. "They broke into my house and threatened me. I want them arrested." "Do you have a copy of the order?" asked another policeman. Tim nodded his head. "I have it, officer," Tim said. He pulled out an envelope that was lying on the kitchen table and handed it to the officer, who carefully studied the order. After a few moments, he returned the order to Tim, then turned to the four men. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," the officer said. The four men glared at Tim as officers handcuffed them and read them their rights. Once they were handcuffed, one of the officers turned to Tim. "Do you have a license for this firearm?" he asked. "Yes, there is," said Tim. "Would you like to see this?" He pulled out his wallet and showed the officer his driver's license and his NRA firearms training card. The officer nodded his head after studying the cards. "Okay," he said. "Be careful with this thing. Do you hear me?" "I hear you, officer," Tim said. "Thank you." The next 3 months passed in a blur for Tim. He enjoyed working at Empire, much more than he ever did working for Jake. Weekly counseling with Rose also helped him deal with trust and anger issues. At the same time, he joined a gym and worked out 3 days a week. He also began taking martial arts classes, more for mental discipline than anything else. On top of that, he took a course of diet and exercise that Rose recommended to him. The divorce went through the system with ease, especially since Candy didn't contest it. However, alienation of affection lawsuits were somewhat different. Ruby warned that they might eventually be fired, and 2 of them were fired. However, the case against Jake surprised both Tim and Ruby. After hearing testimony, reviewing the evidence presented by Ruby, and Jake's financial statements, the judge ruled in Tim's favor and ordered Jake to pay $1 million in damages. At the end of the trial, he didn't have kind words for Jake. "Mr. Hudson, your conduct in this matter is beyond praise," the judge said. You not only took advantage of a man who considered you a friend, you abused your position as his employer to deliberately destroy his marriage and family. I also noticed that you have repeatedly violated the restraining order against you. I therefore find in favor of the plaintiff and order you to pay compensation in the amount of $1 million. Your Honor, this is highly illegal, Jake's lawyer said, standing up. Mr. Winthrop, this court finds Mr. Hudson's conduct not only unlawful, but absolutely disgusting. The decision stands, the judge said. When should this restitution be made? Asked Winthrop. Immediately, said the judge. Unless, of course, your client chooses to spend some time in jail for contempt of court. No, Your Honor. My client will pay as ordered, Winthrop said, sitting back down. Okay, said the judge, and God help you if that check gets rejected. Case is closed. He banged his gavel, ending the hearing. Jake wrote out a check and gave it to his lawyer, who gave it to the bailiff. After the judge took note of the check, the bailiff handed it to Ruby, who in turn handed it to Tim. To Tim's surprise, the check did honor the bank, and it paid Ruby her share of the judgment. While working at Empire, Tim was contacted by several of Jake's clients. Word of the lawsuit seemed to spread around the world, and a number of companies were leery of continuing to do business with someone who was intentionally ruining another man's marriage. In their opinion, a person who would deliberately destroy a friend's marriage simply cannot be trusted. The way things were going, Tim believed Jake would go bankrupt within a year. All this time, Tim refused to go on dates, although several very nice women from the company approached him. In his opinion, he will be a married man until he receives his final divorce. Once this happens, he will be free to continue the relationship, but not before. When the divorce finally came, he went to celebrate with friends from work. A couple of months after he finalized the divorce, Candy's mother called him. Tim, this is Bernice. Do you have a few minutes? She asked. Of course, Bernice, he said. What's happening? This is Candy, she said. She is HIV infected. She just received her test results. I'm sorry to hear that, Bernice, Tim said. But to be honest, I'm not surprised. Besides, we're officially divorced now, so there's nothing I can do about it. She is not covered by my insurance, and I am not responsible for her. I know, Bernice said. I was just hoping that maybe you would understand it deep down and talk to her a little. Well, I think I can, but I don't know what good it will do, he said. Please just come and talk to her for a few minutes, Bernice begged. Tim thought for a moment before answering. Okay, he said. I'll come in for a few minutes. Thank you very much, Bernice said. Tim drove up to Bernice and George's house and was shocked to see how thin and frail Candy looked. She walked towards him, but he waved her away. Saddened, she sat down and invited him to sit on the sofa. You look good, Tim, she said. Better than I remember. How are things going with you? Okay, Candy, he said. New job, new friends, new outlook on life. How are you doing? Not good at all, she said. You know that I am HIV infected. That's what your mother said, he told her. I'm sorry to hear this, but to be honest, I'm not surprised. Do you know when you became infected? I think it was one of the days I spent at Jake's, she said. That day I had a lot of unprotected sex with several men. Does Jake know? He asked. She shook her head. Not yet, she said. I'll have to tell him so he can get tested too. I'm sure he won't take it well, Tim said. No, probably not, she said. Look, Tim, I just wanted to apologize to you one last time and hope that maybe you would understand it in your heart and forgive me for what I did to you. I now realize that my actions ruined many lives. I could have said no at any time, but I didn't. I was stupid and greedy, and I let my hormones get the better of my rational mind. And now I'm paying for it. I had the best husband and lover a girl could ask for, and I gave it all up for something new a few days ago. I know you hate me, and you have every right to, but I don't want to go to my grave without your forgiveness. Tim considered her words carefully. It was the first time he could remember that she actually took responsibility for what she did, and the first time she acknowledged what her actions had caused to others. Of course, he could continue to hate her, but he remembered his sessions with Rose. Holding a grudge against Candy won't help him move on. He nodded his head. "Okay, Candy," he said. "I forgive you." She cried, sitting in a chair. He thought about pulling her into his arms and started to stand up, but she waved him off. "Thank you so much, Tim," she said through tears. "This means more to me than you know. Listen, I want you to find a woman you can love and trust. Marry her and have children. I'm over it. I'm done. But you have your whole life ahead of you, and you deserve to be happy." "Thank you," he said. "I'll do so. And if you ever want to just talk, let me know, okay?" She nodded her head, wiping tears from her eyes. "I will do so, Tim," she said. "Thank you for coming and talking to me. I've missed you so much these past few months." "I miss the woman I married," Tim said calmly. "By the way, how are things with Jake and Mike?" She shook her head. "It's not good," she said. "Lately he has become very cruel. He didn't take losing to you in court very well. You probably know that his business has suffered a lot lately." "I noticed," Tim said. "Did he hurt you, physically?" "Not yet, but he's very harsh," she said. "Do you want me to be with you when you tell him about your diagnosis?" Tim asked. "No, but thanks for asking anyway," she said. "This is my responsibility and I have to deal with it. You know, I keep thinking that if I had just told him to leave that first day of camping, we would still be together." "It's quite possible," Tim said. "But I have a feeling that at some point it would have happened anyway. He's been hunting you for quite some time." "I think you're right," she said. "Look, I'm really tired and I need to rest before I come back. Thanks for coming. This means more to me than you know." "You're welcome, Candy," he said. "And remember, call me if you just want to talk." "Fine?" She nodded her head weakly. "I will do so," she said. "Goodbye, Tim," she added. "Think about me from time to time. Fine?" He sensed a certain finality in her last statement and wondered if she intended to commit suicide. "I will do so," he said. "Just don't do anything stupid, okay?" She smiled. "I won't," she said. He stood up and headed towards the door. Bernice approached him before he left. "Thank you, Tim," she said, hugging him. "It means more to her than you think, and for me too." "You're welcome, Bernice," he said. "Keep an eye on her, okay?" "I will do so," she said. A couple of weeks later, Tim was sitting on his couch, eating dinner and watching the evening news, when he heard a report that caught his attention. The bodies of a local businessman, his son, and a woman believed to be the man's mistress were found earlier today in what police believe was a double murder-suicide, the presenter said. Jacob Hudson, president and founder of Hudson Consulting, along with his son and a woman who has not yet been identified, were found dead. All three were victims of gunshot wounds, authorities said. Police are investigating the incident and more details will be provided as they are released. After recovering from his initial shock, Tim called Bernice. She was sobbing when she answered the phone. "Bernice, what's going on?" he asked. "We just got word that Candy is dead," she said. "Looks like that bastard Jake shot her, then his own son, and himself." "Oh my God," Tim said. "I saw the news report and hoped it wasn't her." "I am so sorry." "That's her," Bernice said. "Do the police have any idea why this happened?" Tim asked. "They're not 100% sure," she said, "but I'm pretty sure she told Jake about her HIV and he lost his mind. They are now conducting an autopsy." "I'm really sorry, Bernice," Tim said. "I want you to know that I never wanted this to happen." "I know, Tim," she said. "Candy made her own bed and paid for it. Still, it's hard to lose your only child like that. I'm just glad you were able to make peace with her. I like to think she's in a better place now." "Fine, let me know if there is anything I can do," he said. "Thank you, Tim," she said. Candy's memorial service was held a couple of weeks later, and Tim took the day off work to be there with her parents. According to the autopsy results, both Jake and Mike, like Candy, were found to be HIV positive. From what police were able to piece together, Candy told Jake about her diagnosis and said they should get tested. When Jake and Mike learned they too had tested positive, Hudson Sr. shot her in the head, then his son, and finally shot himself. Tim spent several days mourning Candy's death, remembering the good years they had spent together. Then one day, out of the blue, he received a visit from Cynthia Stone, another representative who worked on his team. "Hello, cowboy," she said. "Would you like to join us for happy hour tonight? You look like you could use some company." Tim thought about it for just a moment. He almost refused her, but then changed his mind. "What the hell," he said. "I could use some good company right now. Of course, I'll join you." "Well, then come to Hitchhikers after work, okay?" she asked, smiling. "I'll be there," he said. "Thanks for the invitation." So, the cycle of life continues, he thought when she left. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.